Testing 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go in and make sure this is showing up. It looks like we're live, so I'm going to go in and start the video. Oh, hold up. 5, 4, 3, 2. Alright, I'm going to go in and start. What is up on the UX, guys? This is Top Hat Productions 115 coming at you with yet another video and the first live stream on this channel of 2021. Or as some of you have affectionately called it, 2020 Part 2, depending on how your year is going. However, I'm going to go ahead and call it 2021 because it is going pretty well on my end so far. So with that, I'm going to go on and pull up the main stuff here. And here's the main screen. Firstly, the new parts that I mentioned a few network interface cards, a few NICs, and also I believe I mentioned, yes, I mentioned a sort of SSD, well not an SSD, but a storage, yes, an I/O accelerator as well. I mentioned a few network cards, and I mentioned an I/O accelerator, primarily targeted at accelerating storage. If I can pull it up quickly, I'll try to show you the actual parts that I am referring to, but I am not sure. I know where they are. Tech Power Up, Server Project. This project mirror is always up to date, right? This one's like the one that never has issues. Here we go. So in the last video that I posted about the server, I said that things got off to a rocky start. I mentioned things about vCenter server appliance taking 20 to 40 minutes to start up. I also mentioned that I was unable to get any of the new network cards working in the server, and that I had to pretty much pull out all the new parts that hadn't been originally slated for the project. However, things have changed. Firstly, if I can find the part number, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to. What I could do, I know what I'm going to do. Pause button. Do I show the part numbers in the description? You know what? I probably do not, but I know where it is. It's going to be here in this project log here, because I show everything there. I'm going to go on. Oh, yep, there we go. So that's one of the NICs that didn't work out too well. It was this NIC right here, and this one has not been retested yet. This one I have not retested because of the fact that this one will not be necessary really until I actually start the Linux VM, because the Linux VM is supposed to handle routing tasks, which is why I mentioned, I believe, FR routing? Yeah, FR routing a few weeks ago back in November. But I also mentioned that the server at one time had the Solar Flare NIC, or the network adapter. I have actually pulled out the Solar Flare network adapter, and I have it sitting on my desk right here. Due to the way that things have gone, I might be able to actually put this spare network card into another computer to start a 10 gig rollout throughout my house, or at least throughout the devices that I currently have control over. So this NIC will most likely go into another computer sometime soon, while the server has its own from HP, and I have to find, or at least I would like to find. But long story short, the HP NIC that I mentioned from last week has 2 SFP ports in it, as you already know. If you watched the last video, you will know these details. I'm going to just run over it really briefly. The NIC that I inserted from HP has 2 SFP ports, and it comes with a memory module. When they're both inserted into the server, the 2 SFP ports have 10 gigabit speeds, and then on top of that, it supposedly upgrades 2 of the other integrated Ethernet ports to 10 gig as well. So I would end up having, I believe, 4 10 gig ports in all. And then the other 2 Ethernet ports, I think, actually get disabled. So that's how the HP NIC works, and I even showed off the HP NIC in the previous video. The Solar Flare NIC, on the other hand, is one that you just insert, and it gives you two SFP 10 GBE ports right out the gate. The nice thing about the HP NIC is the fact that it does not take up any of the it doesn't take up any of the main PCIe slots within like the main body of the server. Instead, it actually connects to the SPI board, I believe that's what it's called. Yeah, it connects to the SPI board on like the back side of it. And as a result of it not taking up any of the primary PCIe slots in like the main body of the server, that's at least one more slot they can use for a different device. That slot has been allocated to an I/O accelerator that I mentioned here. Gladly, that part number is in view here. And that was something that I purchased like back in November, and it finally arrived in like early or mid-December. But this thing right here is currently in the server, and so is the HP NIC. The solar flare NIC is out of the server, which means that the server has 10 gig, and the workstation that's doing this live stream right now could end up getting that solar flare NIC, which means it could also end up getting 10 gig as well in the next few weeks, which is great. However, I have not tested the Wi-Fi NIC out yet, as in the D-RAID card, and that's just because of the fact that in order to get the other newer devices working first, like an HP NIC and that I/O storage accelerator, in order to get those working, I had to insert them one at a time and then reboot the server like 2 or 3 times in order to get it working. The server wasn't having too fun of a time when I tried to put in all of the hardware at once, so I added it one piece at a time, restarted it, made sure that everything showed up, and then from there tested the VMs. And so far, everything seems to be showing up. So I have to add hardware relatively slowly to the server. I have to add it one piece at a time to make sure that everything's working. Otherwise, I have a chance, especially of the 16 terabyte drive cage over there on top of the server. There have been multiple instances where if I add new hardware really quickly to the server, some of those drives either won't show up or just the entire, like all the drives in the cage won't show up. So I have to be very careful about how I add new hardware from here on, from what I can see. Which I don't really have an issue doing. It just means that testing will be a lot slower because I have to do it one device at a time. And I don't really mind taking my time with this type of stuff anyway. But, as it looks now, there appears to be only one more device really that I have to test with the server before I can actually move forward with everything pertaining to the Linux VM, because as I mentioned, the Linux VM will handle an FR routing instance of sorts, if I can have it that way. If I can have it handle FR routing and use both a wireless and a wired network adapter, I could possibly get rid of the current router that I'm using and have the Linux VM simply act as a virtual router instead, which would be very convenient, and I'd be able to manage everything from one area. Aside from that, if I remember correctly, there is one more thing that I meant to mention. Yes, the VMware Project Mirror is actually back as well. The VMware Project Mirror was it was auto-marked as spam, but it's only because of the fact that the VMware community is moving to a new platform and they're having some growing pains right now. So I got in contact with one of the moderators, and they were kind enough to actually make sure that that Project Mirror got reinstated, so it's all good to go. Aside from that, the Windows VM is nearly complete. However, Active Directory and DNS are giving me a few problems. I'm having some issues adding devices to the Active Directory, so I'm going to continue working with that until I get that ironed out and everything. The Active Directory, though, should be kind of finished and ready by the end of January, though, at the very latest. I'm thinking I could probably get it done in a few weeks, though, at most. Aside from that, I have yet to actually put the K80s into the server yet, primarily due to the hardware testing issues that I mentioned before, because as of now I have to be very slow with how I add hardware to the server, as you already know. So I'll probably test the K80s as one of the last things I add to the server before I make the Windows 10 VM. And you can probably hear the server running in the background right now. But long story short, the server project is moving along very nicely. And as you guys saw, I think maybe a week ago, maybe a few days ago, but yes. I also recently did another 3K 60 FPS live stream that went better than last time. However, I had to turn down some settings really low, and I did see a little bit of artifacting in the last gaming live stream, which means that as of now, at least, the GTX 1080's ability to actually stream 3K 60 FPS might be a little bit hindered right now. But a lot of that, I think, had to do with the fact that it was constantly pegged at 100%, and some of the settings I had turned up to begin with actually have some compute overhead on that card that won't really work out if it's pegged at 100%. If I remember correctly, it wasn't encoder overload, but encoder lag, I think, or something like that. But I was talking with some of my friends on Discord about this recently, and one of the ways that it could be alleviated would be either by getting a new graphics card with more compute power, or possibly overclocking the GTX 1080. And it just so happens I overclocked the GTX 1080 right before that last live streaming attempt, and it went better than previous live streaming attempts. So what I could do is I could attempt a slightly more aggressive overclock to see if I could actually neaten things up a little bit and make the live stream a little bit less blotchy. But overall, that's going to require at least a week or two to actually sort out. And I've also been looking into actually getting a dedicated encoder appliance as well. A dedicated encoder appliance would actually make it so that I wouldn't have to rely on the NVENC and CUDA compute capabilities of the card, and instead what I could do is simply have a separate appliance do the encoding task so that the GPU only does one thing, and that is render the scene before it's sent off to the encoding appliance. So far in OBS, I've actually had to turn off quite a few settings, I believe. For example, let me go and pull up the settings right now. Output, I think. Yeah. So it's on low latency performance. I've turned off both look ahead and cycle visual tuning, and I have the bitrate kind of locked at almost 1300 kilobits. So this means that, and let's just take a look here, enables dynamic B-frames. If disabled, the encoder will always use the number of B-frames specified. If enabled, increase the visual quality by only using however many B-frames are necessary up to the maximum. In this case, not only have I turned it off, but I've also turned off cycle visual tuning, and cycle visual tuning enables the encoder. Yeah, in other words, you can optimize the use of bitrate. I've turned both of those off, which means that the number of B-frames and also the bitrate is going to remain relatively close to 1300 at any given time, which means that the encoder or the GPU can't dynamically allocate more or less resources. And the only reason why I did this was because of the fact that when I left on these settings, the graphics card, it was still pegged at 100, but what would happen is the entire live stream would start to pick up. It would pretty much start to drop frames like crazy. And as a result, I actually had to look into what was happening, and the first thing that I saw was that dreaded encoder overload message whenever I left these settings on. So as a result, I actually sacrificed pretty much some visual quality in order to actually prevent that from happening. But even with those off, there is still the high possibility that if the GPU is occupied enough with just the game or whatever that I'm running on screen, it's still going to have a bad time. So I have to leave those settings off, which means that the live stream isn't going to look quite as nice as I was hoping. However, with the dedicated encoding appliance, I wouldn't have to worry about this. So maybe I can get that sometime this year. Or maybe I can get a new graphics card sometime this year, but that's very unlikely with the way the market is right now. I am way more likely to get an encoding appliance, like a dedicated appliance for that task, especially if I can get it for, get over here, under $1,000. Anyway, so long story short, the 10 gig rollout will begin in probably a week or so. The server is like 2 steps closer to being ready, and I also need to look into whether or not the I/O accelerator can be used as a virtual flash resource. I do not know that yet, and I will be asking about that in the VMware and possibly HP forums soon enough. So you guys stay tuned. And how long has this live stream been running? It's been running for around 15 minutes. I might do a gaming live stream sometime later this afternoon or evening. It is currently 4:35 p.m. So you guys keep it cool, and I'll see you in the next stream, whenever that is. Also, by the way, I almost forgot, the mod packs will be receiving an update sometime later this month. I want to actually make sure that the entire Aether experience makes it to all the mod packs. So I'll be working on that wherever there are any deficiencies. Aside from that, I will see you in the next video. This is Toppat signing out. Peace.